Hey everyone, welcome. We're going to get started here in just a second. Let a few more people trickle in. Feel free to drop any questions that you want to get answered in the chat, and we'll do our best to answer them as we go. All right, here we go. Welcome everyone to Office Hours. If this is your first time here, happy to have you. We do this the first Wednesday of every month, and it's kind of just an opportunity for us to open our doors and answer questions that anyone has about Office 365, or we're using technology better at their workplace and helping build a workplace that people love to work. A couple housekeeping things before we get started. You are seeing us either on Teams or YouTube. For those of you on Teams, we're happy to answer any questions that you have in chat. If you have something that you want to talk to us about, you're welcome to raise your hand and we can allow you to come off mute. If you're on YouTube, unfortunately we can't do that part, so keep just using chat. Otherwise, we are going to answer a couple questions that we got ahead of time from people, which I'm going to show you. In case you didn't know, you can go out to our website, bulb.digital/office hours, and if you scroll down here a little bit, you can actually submit your question ahead of time, and you can basically get first in line to answer any of your questions. So we have a couple of those ready that we're going to answer today. And then last thing before we go into the questions, we wanted to share that we actually have a product available for pre-order right now. If you lead a workplace and you are struggling with things like rumor mills or things where you're trying to be heard in all the noise of the workplace and it is really hard to just get your team aligned and you're struggling with internal communication, we have created the product just for you. It's a guidebook that we've spent many hours on that helps you kind of shift some ways of your thinking, give you steps that you can take to improve your workplace. And it's available for pre-order for the next couple of weeks. And so that is half price of what it would normally be. So I'd love for you to go out there and check it out. We'll drop a link to that in the chat. So you can actually get a free preview of it as well. With that said, let's head to the first question that we have. I'll go ahead and read it quick. They said, this is from Erin Markle. She said, "Hi there, I have a question about service principals versus service accounts. I have a complex Canvas app solution that uses Dataverse tables, Power Automate flows, and data flows. Which account is best for having a system created record value?" She goes into a little bit more detail, but the gist of the question is, okay, I'm using these tools, Power Apps, Power Automate. They're using my account right now, but I've heard that I can use service principals or service accounts as a way to kind of disconnect myself from that process. So I'm going to lean on Matt to explain that a little bit, but if that question sounds a little bit technical to you, I do want to share. We like to kind of dive in and out of the really technical stuff as we go. So don't feel any pressure to ask something very technical. I actually challenge you to ask one that is maybe a little bit higher level for those that might be joining us today. So, Matt, how do we feel about service principals?
Yeah, so service principals and service accounts are really very useful. Service accounts is basically just a regular user account, but you make it special within Active Directory or within your business process to say, hey, this is an account that's special, that we treat differently. It's not a named account. It's not for a person. It's for a service. Service principal is something a little different. It's not a regular user. It's a separate thing that you create in Active Directory. It's actually more closely related to an app registration or an application user. And they have their own purposes. In regards to this specific question, it's a really kind of an interesting question. In Dataverse, for tables within Dataverse, there is actually a number of fields, and it's unclear exactly what Aaron's asking about. And so if Aaron's on, feel free to provide us some more context. But there's actually created by, there's modified, and then there's the owner. Those are the three kind of default standard fields that come with Dataverse tables. And those have different meanings, especially as it relates to access and control and, not wanting it to come from me. And some of the question is, is the created by, the modified by important, or is the owner important? Created and modified is like what someone would see as, what you probably are familiar with in lots of tools for the identity that actually modified or created the record. The owner is actually in Dataverse is a security thing. So the owner can be the organization, it can be a user, it can be a business unit, and depending on which one you choose and depending on what permission you've given someone for that table, it has a huge impact on what someone owns within the table. Based on what Aaron said, I think
she is here in YouTube chat. She says, "Thanks for taking my question."
So I believe she's talking about created by, modified by, and for created and modified by, the best thing to do, or the easiest thing to do in many cases, is to use a service account. A service account is easy to create, it's easy to manage, and it can be, you can use that same account for lots of things, and it's a user record that can be the created by, be the modified by, etc. In regards to a service principal, you can do that too, and that would be okay. But I think in many cases, a service account is easier for people to create and own. The other question I would ask is, do you need to send emails, right? So the conversation here was about, creating data within the tables and not having it be associated to a person. If you also need to send emails, send notifications as a user, or not as the person that's developing the solution, service account is pretty much the only way to do it. Service principals aren't enabled for every type of connection. So SharePoint as an example, Outlook as an example, there is no concept of using those as a service principal. And so service account is more universally able to be used across all scenarios. So for the first one, unless I get some more context, my recommendation would be probably a service account because it's more flexible. In the second one, about a larger conversation about building solutions and not being the owner, not being something created for me or by me. It depends on the environment that you're working in. If you're dealing in one environment, so I have one environment, maybe it's the default environment, using a service account to create that stuff is going to be the easiest thing for you to do. So what that means is, because you can sign into that account, you can actually sign in and create the application or the connection and then share it with your regular user to do development as an example, and then the service account is the thing that owns it. If you're dealing in an environment that you have multiple environments, so you have a dev, a test, and a prod, and you're using solutions, I would recommend using a service principal and using ALM from within either DevOps or managed environments or something like that to actually deploy from one environment to the next environment. And so what that means is that in development, you may own the application or the thing that you're creating, but in production and test, they're actually owned by the service principal, which is the thing that deployed to development or to test to production. So again,
you're going over my head, Matt.
Yeah, I know.
This is deep.
But the question is deep.
Yeah, it is.
The bottom line is, if I were to break it all down, is service account is going to be universally be able to be used in almost all scenarios. It's going to be easier to create, but there is going to be a licensing cost. There is going to be, some other nuances to it. A service principal it's very useful and you should use it, but it's really most applicable to a few scenarios where it's really valuable.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll say in my experience with it, there's been instances where we have a process where someone needs support, and so they fill out a form and then it gets added to our task board. But not everyone that is creating that request has access to our task board. And so in order to kind of separate the permissions there, we use a service account. And so that's been really helpful to us in that respect. Yeah, it's something that, again, is very technical, but it's a way to separate yourself from the process and say, this is the business's process. If I get hit by a bus tomorrow, it's okay because this is something that is ongoing. But there is a little bit of nuance to, you can't use them, you shouldn't use them to skirt licensing requirements. Yeah,
for sure. So creating a service account, so Microsoft has in their licensing mumbo jumbo, the terms of service, you can't just use a service account to get around licensing. So in the scenario that Mitch is talking about, everybody still has a license. We still have licensing associated to it. We're using the service account purely for security reasons. If we were trying to do it as to say, we're using another tool for task management, but I don't want to get everybody else permissions to it, or not just permissions, but licensing for it, and I want to use this service account to do all of that, so then I only pay for one license, that's not kosher. Even though you can do it, if you get caught, you'll run afoul of the lawyers. And that's not just a Microsoft thing.
Microsoft will come and get you.
It's not just a Microsoft thing. It's across the board, and I think everybody can kind of understand why that's happening. So
yeah, cool. We don't see any other questions. There are a few people here, so I will maybe task you with a thought. We're kind of entering the end of the year, which gets people thinking about the next year. What are some of your goals for the next year, and what is maybe something that you're not exactly sure how to approach it or how to tackle it in a way that you think you'll be able to accomplish it in the next year? So that's just a prompt. Think about that. We do have a question from Zindi. They say, any idea when Loop will allow for copying/creating custom templates or a workaround? I don't have any info on when that will be. I have heard that custom templates is definitely something that is on the roadmap and something that people have been requesting all the time. So I wish I had a more clear answer, but we want it too. We have processes that we use, like our blog writing. It would be awesome to just be like, hey, give me an outline for a blog, and someone can go just populate it. So we're pushing for that as well.
Yeah, but we're also, I think in our mind, we're happy that there's a tool that's not a third-party tool that we have to go try to use, that is somewhat integrated, that at least does quite a bit.
Yes.
Just meaning we're fans, I think, of Loop in general.
Yeah. They
it's
say
not all the way there, but
we want to build it into our weekly staff meeting agendas for sure.
Yep.
Emma is behind the camera. She uses it a lot in meetings and taking notes.
Yes, and I also see that, Zindi, you're writing about the planner integration. We also are loving that, and we'll probably come out here with a video or blog post about it soon, but a super powerful tool, and I'm on board as well.
Yeah, I think it's in its infancy a little bit. I'm excited to see it mature a little bit more. And I feel like that's my blocker for creating a video about it, but it's definitely something I want to, talk about.
Thing I'm holding out for is the calendar view, which I know they're working on as well. So within the planner integration, creating a space that you can see all the tasks on a calendar, which we know Notion has.
You can in Planner, but the Planner calendar is not. Loop can redeem Microsoft and build a great calendar view.
Yes.
The opportunity is there.
I don't think it'll help.
Microsoft, please help us. Okay, we do have another question from Tanya over on YouTube. They said, I'm going to be starting a new role, so I'm thinking about how to make sure things will run without me. I don't have service accounts or environments.
Yeah.
First, congrats on the new role. That's awesome. Happy for Tanya. She's she's here all the time. She's one of our biggest fans. That is a good question. How do you make sure things will run without you, especially when there's not processes in place? Are there any kind of shortcuts that you would recommend for her?
I mean, if you're not allowed to get service accounts, so they say, they say, well, service accounts are only reserved for, hardcore IT team members, then you don't have much choice other than to manually work to identify who you would want to transfer this to, and work with them to transfer it individually to their account. I would definitely, if you're not using solutions, using solutions will help in that regard, but it's not going to be an easy transition, unfortunately. It's why service accounts and having dev test production environments is so helpful, because then even if, let's say in dev, everything was associated to you, when you leave or when you get transferred to a different job, it's not going to immediately break everything that you're doing. Whereas, depending on what your change is, I know some organizations, if you're changing, for example, divisions, they'll actually delete the old account and create a new account, or will do some things that kind of create a hard break between those two things, and that can be very, very, very problematic. So,
I will say we do have a podcast, one of our early episodes on ownership of resources in the Power Platform. There is some nuance there around what happens if I'm gone and my account gets deleted. How do people find that? Or how does an admin get that and kind of reclaim ownership of it? We dig into all those topics. I'll have Emma look for a link for that. But yeah, if they don't have those systems in place, it's probably make sure it's shared with someone, minimum.
Yeah.
And
well, sharing it is one piece of it, but remember, sharing ownership with another person is not the same as the person that created
ownership.
it. You have to transfer ownership if you really want to give them, which, you either have to be a person that can run PowerShell that will actually do the transfer,
Right.
or you have to delete your old one and create a new one, basically, and have them create it.
Yeah.
But this is the perfect, if I was in control, I would tell Tanya, here's a service account, you need to transfer everything to this service account. And then it's one time, and this is the service account, and you're done.
Mm-hmm. Good question. So yeah, like I said, the podcast dives pretty deep into that. Let's go to another question on YouTube. Matt Kahn, one of our team members, throwing us a softball. They're saying, my friend's work uses Google tools and apps. What's the best argument you could arm them with to start the conversation with their leadership about buying into Microsoft O365?
So the biggest thing is not so much that it's Google versus Microsoft, but it's free. If you're running a business and you're running it off from either free Google or free Office 365, or not Office 365, but free Microsoft accounts and tools, it's not good. So I would have less of I'm not going to tell somebody they have to use Microsoft over Google. I will say that you should probably be paying for the service. Mostly
That's surprising. Matt is one of our biggest Microsoft fanboys.
Yeah, right. I use Google for things.
Mm-hmm.
It's a matter of what's appropriate for the business. We have lots of customers that use Google for things.
Yeah.
Education space is big into Google. I have lots of reasons why one would be better than the other, but it really comes down to the reasons. Many times come down to what people are comfortable with, what they use, what the scenario is. For example, the education space, Google has done a better job. It's gone back and forth between Microsoft and Google, but in that space, Google currently is the more popular tools because that's what the the education space is doing, and they got that because Chromebooks were free, and all of the there's a bunch of other meta things that are happening about why it makes it happen, and the same thing happens for everything else. Choosing one or the other has more to do with what's going on around you, what your history is, what you have been doing. There are way more tools within Microsoft 365. Way more tools in the Microsoft ecosystem relating to business. But if you don't need them, if you don't need Dynamics, if you don't
speaking kind of meta, we as a business are not in the business of persuading or convincing anyone of anything, outside of a few topics that we feel strongly about. This one in particular is like, unless you have a strong business case to like uproot everything and switch to Microsoft, don't. Like, what if there's something that you have a legitimate, like, we're going to be growing and we want to...
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing is look objectively at where you what you need for your business to run, and choose a tool set that can fulfill the most of those things, right? That's the most important thing. In most cases, the reason we do Microsoft stuff primarily is because that covers much like what Microsoft does for lots of things, 80%, right? Like, it covers a huge amount of people. Google doesn't cover quite that much. And for us, that makes it something that is more valuable.
Yeah. Good question. Thanks, Matt. Aaron had a follow-up saying, thanks for the clarification about the owner versus created by columns. How would we change the ownership from user/team on a table to business unit? Similar to Tanya's ask.
So owner is a column on the table, and in the Power Platform Admin Center, there's a whole section for an environment on managing organizations, the organization, and business units. And basically, you have an organization at the top level, and then you have beneath it, you have one or more business units, and that business unit, you can get it in a hierarchy. Like, you can do all sorts of crazy stuff. But the default one is organization, which is everything, all business units, and then user, and then team. And so a team can own it, a business unit can own it, or a organization can own it, or a user can own it. And so basically you configure those business units, and then you associate it. We can send a link, but it gets really complicated. There's a lot of documentation about it. But yeah, it's just a column. You just change it to what you want.
Cool. Thanks, Aaron, for the follow-up. Benjamin, would you mind scrolling us up in the Teams chat a tiny bit? We had a question from Zindy that I want to get to. So they said, any tips for seamlessly integrating calendar planning to tasks, etc.? Is roadmap worth using? We plan our calendar events 2 to 3 years out and constantly have to manually update the various spreadsheets and calendar appointments every time a change is made.
Yeah, I mean, I would ask the question of whether or not it's recurring events. So if you're talking about recurring events, it's definitely challenging. If you're talking about just planning events 2 to 3 years out, the content that's in, again, it depends on what you want to do with it, what you're planning on how you're planning on managing the tasks, etc. But if you're when you say planning the calendar events, if you have a company calendar that you're managing this in, updating the calendar and implementing it in the calendar in SharePoint or somewhere else isn't a bad solution. But quite frankly, Microsoft has not done a great job of providing us an option that is flexible for people. You have Outlook calendars, which are useful but have a lot of deficiencies. They're probably the most powerful calendaring tool.
Zindy, if you want to come off mute and answer any of these questions, we just allowed you to. If you've got any answers for Matt about recurring and what you're looking for there.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, so they're sort of recurring. We work kind of on a cycle. We have 3 cycles a year where we bring artists. We're a nonprofit. We bring artists and display their work. So, the artists live here for 2 months, and then the artwork is displayed for 2 months. So they're sort of recurring, but each instance is different, and sometimes we have to move dates around because of holidays.
Yep.
So, it's basically
personal?
like the same set of things.
Is it personal, like just for you or your organization, or do you also use that for marketing out to other locations?
Both, yeah, because we have to share all of the dates. There's a certain set of dates that we give to curators, a certain set of dates we give to artists, a certain set we give to the communications team, but it all stems from this one master calendar. And so right now we have, different Word documents with the calendars broken out in bullet points. And then we have an Excel sheet with the master date calendar. And then we have them put into Outlook. But every time a change is made, we have to go into each one and manually update it. And if one doesn't get updated, it's a mess.
I don't know what you're talking. This sounds manageable to me. Yeah. What do you mean? I'm going to give a hot take and say Microsoft does not have an awesome calendar planner tool outside of maybe Project. Project gives like a good roadmap, like I forget the term of the chart, but a Gantt chart showing timeline of things and how things line up.
And there's interdependencies. But for what you're trying to do, the real question I would have is to think about the purposes for each of the things that you have it today. Like you have a calendar, you have Word documents. Is it just filtering it? Is it just not showing some things to some people and showing things to other people? You can do in SharePoint with calendar views, especially if you're not doing recurring stuff. I think there's some options there potentially. I don't think Planner is a great option. I think Project for the Web could be, but it may be overkill for what you're trying to do because it's really meant for task management.
Right. I would say I am keeping my hopes high for Loop. I think it might be an okay solution to what you're talking about. The key there is that you're still going to have to keep things in sync, but if you use maybe the components aspect of Loop where you can keep things linked across different pages and share them in just different contexts, it might work. But again, like Emma was saying, we're holding out for an actual calendar view. But as far as replacing things like Excel lists and Word documents, I would for sure try a Loop out.
So, Zindy, you said would roadmap work? When you say roadmap, do you mean the roadmap functionality within Planner for the Web?
Project for the Web.
Or Project for the Web, yeah.
Yes. My understanding is roadmap's sort of a more scaled down version of Project. Maybe I'm wrong. I've never used it.
Not really. So the way that relationship works is that you have plans or projects within Project for Web, and then roadmap is really to say I have 5 projects. How do they all work together? So a plan is like the smallest level, and it's like, I have a project that goes for 2 months, and here's all the tasks related to it. And then I have another one that goes for 2 months. And then at the top level, you have a roadmap where you can say, well, this project and this project are next to each other, or overlap, or whatever that might be. I believe you can use a roadmap without having a project, so you can just put stuff on there. But I don't remember licensing wise whether or not you can have by just the roadmap thing and not the other. In which case you're paying quite a bit of money for, if you're not going to use the project aspect of it with all the task management. Which maybe there's a bunch of tasks related to these artists showing up, and you need that level of detail where you need to have a task for 2 weeks ahead of time. Somebody's going to call them and make, whatever that might be. And so maybe the project end of it would be very Project for the Web would be very helpful in that regard. But I just don't know about it. But definitely, it's a challenge. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah, and we aren't too shy to say there might be a better event management software out there than creating your own with Microsoft. Might be worth looking around. But Tanya said over on YouTube is saying she went kind of the automation route where she has a master list that has a flow that sends due dates and et cetera all to different tracking lists. So you could go the automation route if you wanted to, but that could get complex. Thanks for the question.
So Tanya had a follow-up question about the change in ownership, et cetera. It really depends. The question is, is a team as an owner enough, or do I need to have it make someone the actual owner and change all the connections? It depends on what you're trying to do. In general, yes, you have to go. If you really want to have a clean break and say they own this and I own this, you have to transfer everything. All the connections have to get updated to a new user. The owner needs to get transferred. You can't change if you've created it, you can't remove yourself. So if you, as a rule, because you're no longer in this role, shouldn't be the one getting alerts when the thing fails, etc. The only way to solve that is to transfer ownership to someone else, which the manual way to do that is literally create it, have the user create and export what you have as a template or as a solution package, have the other user import it into their own account, and then they own it. And it's just very unfortunate. And it's a challenge when you don't have a good governance or strategy around how to manage that stuff from a corporate or a organization-wide level.
Cool. Let's just take a moment here and say we're at about the halfway point for office hours here. If you are just joining us, wanted to share a welcome. Thanks for joining us. We do this the first Wednesday of every month, and it's kind of just an opportunity for people to come in, ask questions, totally free, no strings attached. Outside of if we helped you, we'd love for you to give us a shout out with the link that Emma posted. But for those of you on Teams chat, you're welcome to raise your hand if you have any questions. Otherwise, feel free to drop any questions that you have in chat. I don't think we have any that we haven't answered for the moment. So maybe I'll reprompt what we were kind of talking about earlier, which was 2024 is coming. What are you working on? What's your challenges for that? And how might we be able to help, get you unstuck on those things? Maybe I'll talk about one of our challenges, our goals for 2024 is how to engage with the community more. So we have a YouTube channel here, obviously, where we build videos that are sort of one way that we can get comments on and respond to. And then far on the other side, we have clients who are paying a bunch of money to work with us on a project basis. And it's been challenging to find something in the middle. And so we're evaluating an option of what would it look like to have a community that, like a paid membership community where people could join and get more ongoing answers to questions, things that are similar in nature to this office hours event, and really just creating a community of people that are all marching down the same path towards, improving their workplace, using technology better, all those things. So if anyone has any thoughts on that or interest, we'd love to know. That's something that we're evaluating for next year. But while we wait for some questions to pop in, why don't, Benjamin, if you want to just play us some music and give us some elevator music while we wait, that'd be awesome. Good timing, Aaron. We appreciate the question. She is asking a question over on YouTube saying, how do we navigate pro developers who are used to .NET solutions to understand the low-code approach of Power Platform and a more agile approach, especially when they hold the keys to the castle? Before Matt jumps in, I do want to share, we actually, quite a few of us here at Bulb have a background in .NET development, technical custom solution development. And so we have had to navigate going from having our hands on the code to being okay with a more low-code approach. And I actually went and wrote a blog on that as well, some of the mindset shifts that I had to think about, which I'll probably review to answer this question. But Matt, how do we help developers get out of, not get out of, but like be okay with low code when they're used to doing something that they have their hands at a deep level with.
Yeah, I think there's a number of aspects to this that we cover. The first of which is to kind of give some context, like what Mitch was saying. Mitch, myself, Mike, we're all, I'm a computer science major. Developing code is something that I am passionate about, that I like doing. But at the same time, both Mike and I have pretty much always had some level of low code involvement, for 20 some years. We've done both. We've done hardcore .NET, JavaScript, mobile development, as well as, what you would consider to be low code, because low code, or the concept of RAD development, low code development, whatever you want to call it, has been around for quite a long time. There's a piece of it that is about a developer getting used to the actual low code concept, which is largely, in my mind, about letting go of the control. .NET developers are used to being able to do whatever they want. If they have a dream, or if a product manager or a marketing person has a dream, they can make it happen no matter what. That is not the case with low code.
Yeah, that was actually the first thing that I called out in that blog was I had to accept I am not 100% in control. I was really used to when a client asked me, hey, can we do this thing? I'll say, hey, we can do anything. That just depends on how much time and money you have. That is not always the case with low code. So accepting that you're
and
not.
It's not bad. There's tremendous benefits to doing that, because quite frankly, developers are bad at designing UI.
What do you mean?
Developers are bad at designing, there's a bunch of stuff that developers aren't really good at, and it costs a lot of money to do that properly. So number one, they need to accept letting go, and being able to live within what is there. And one of the best ways to do that is to have them understand the benefits of doing it, the way that the just following the pattern and doing what's there. The other aspect of what you mentioned is more agile approach. Agile is not necessarily synonymous with low code, not necessarily. Especially when you talk about doing dev test prod and these things, you can end up in a very non-agile approach. So I would separate that out and just be more about, or you might have a challenge where just in general, the organization or the developers or whatever in general are not familiar and not used to agile, and doing training and doing, Emma recently went to Scrum Master training, things like that are very helpful in just changing the mindset, which is a mindset of I'm gonna get a little piece done and I'm gonna show it to the user immediately, which there is a piece of it that I can see how you're relating that to low code, no code, because unlike in .NET development, where I spend the first 6 months developing my, low level API calls, and then the next layer I start working on the next thing maybe, it's more natural, you almost can't do it that way. You always have something that is ready to go. But I would say that is an example of someone doing .NET development that was never even trying to do agile, right? In an agile approach in .NET, even in .NET development, you're trying to do something really, really small that you can do all the way up the stack. So that's the agile thing. But then the hold the keys to the kingdom, I don't know whether or not you mean whether or not the keys are to the product, we developed this stuff in .NET, so I have all the knowledge and I know what's going on, or whether or not you mean that they're the ones that own the low code platform, they're the tenant admins for the system. What I'm going to really talk about for a minute is just about the tenant admin and the people who are kind of owning what's going on. Doing good low code development that is more than just one team, one group of people doing one thing, requires a top level approach and a strategy that is distributed throughout the organization. And those people are the only people that can do it. And it's really hard. Microsoft and all of these low code tool manufacturers don't make it easy. And they should spend time at it, and you're going to see the value out of it. Having somebody who is just running while doing low code, no code development, and don't have any controls, it's largely what's happening with Tanya. She's made a lot of progress from a business perspective, but it's, she's now moving on, and we're talking about how she can, transfer that. That should have been thought about from the beginning, right? You can do things to make that better starting off, but
that's not to say Tanya did something. I'm sure she wanted to.
No. We had this conversation with her before. Like, she did what she could do with the tools that she was given. But the way to have this best, when you talk about pro developers, if you can give them that structure, honestly, it's going to make this pro developers like, oh, this is just like normal development. I'm just using a different tool.
Right.
I still have dev, test, prod. I still do requirements. I still do ALM. I still do like all these things that developers are like super accustomed to. And you're like, oh, okay, like this makes sense. I can fit that in my mind, in how I work, right? But it takes work, and the organization needs to do it.
I'll say I've considered starting a support group for developers that are forced to use low-code solutions, because the pain is real sometimes. I'm going to have Benjamin share my screen for a second. This is another learning from that I have gone through, is accepting that this triangle of cheap, fast, and good, like you always have to pick two, right? But the code heavy side of it, the non-low code, the deep code is almost never fast or cheap, but the low code side kind of almost covers all three, and like the good enough gets pretty close to being hitting that mark of good. And so I think being able to accept that you might not get all of the way, but man, if you're checking the box on the business outcomes that they're trying to achieve, just not to the nth degree, it's probably okay.
Yeah, I mean, the reality is, again, low code in the way that it is developed as of today can cover a huge chunk of things, like a huge chunk of requirements. I've talked about it before. Like, if you are trying to do stock trading, low code, no code is not the platform for you. But how many people are developing stock trading platforms? If you're trying to do a real-time chat application, low code, no code is probably not the platform for you. But how many people are developing chat platforms, right? Most people are doing what used to be done in Access databases, or what's currently being done in Excel, or what is currently being done in on paper. You can probably do almost all of it in low code, no code, without as long as you don't get hung up on an owner that is like, right click is the only way to drag and drop, and right click to do this is the only way to do this. It's like if you're hung up on that, this may not be the platform.
They're missing something. Yeah. And the last learning that I had was a low code solution may just be step one. So I had to accept the fact that, okay, maybe something's trying to get done cheap or faster than it would be able to with pro code. Maybe that's just step one, and they want to actually prove out the usefulness of a solution. And so let's use low code to
prove it out,
get it as far as we can.
Yeah.
And if that thing takes off and there's enough pain points where you say, you know what, it is worth the investment to do code, which we've seen before. We've expanded on solutions before and gone the next step and made it slightly more complex.
Even in low code, there's different levels.
Yeah.
We've done solutions where we did an initial proof of concept or initial implementation that's all, no licensing required.
Yep.
SharePoint backend, all out of the box stuff, default permission, default licensing, and then the customer's like, "This is amazing. We want to add these features," and we go, "Okay, cool. You're now making a serious investment. We need to switch to Dataverse. You need to get licensing. Right. You need to do these other things." And then there's, exactly as you said, there's also even further steps to say, you're doing all of this. This is really great, but there's these couple pieces that aren't fulfilled with this. We probably need a custom application to solve that problem.
Cool. I think Tanya had one more kind of comment question. She said, I need to do a more structured approach to requirements gathering. Are there any tools, lists of questions, et cetera, that you favor? I don't know if it will answer your question exactly, but tomorrow, if you're signed up for our newsletter, you're going to get notified of a blog that I wrote that's all about aligning change to your business goals. And it goes through 3 different processes that we've used to help leaders understand some of their business drivers and why they're doing what they're doing, so that we can then come behind them and build solutions. So I would encourage you to check that out tomorrow. But there are probably more, industry standard ways that you do for software development.
Yeah, I think there's 2 different aspects to it. One is the actual management of requirements, et cetera, which from a development perspective, a lot of that is for us, DevOps, GitHub, like that kind of thing, which is a very developer centric, but it also really has a lot of synergies with how you should be managing software across the board, regardless of whether or not it's low code, no code. If it's a business critical thing, right? So if it's what we would call individual development or individual productivity type scenarios, that's do what you want. Like, you don't need requirements. It's in your head. It is what it is. If it's team, again, you probably don't need something like that. Mm-hmm. The moment it steps up a level into, something else, into like, this is really, really important. And if it goes down or if it's not right, we're going to, lose thousands of dollars, hundreds of thousands of dollars if it's not correct. You should have a real tool, and the tools that we would, in the Microsoft world, DevOps, GitHub, those would be the 2 from a requirements management perspective. They're enterprise level tools. And then there's another piece of it, which is like methodology, strategy, which is what Mitch was talking about. And the biggest thing I would say there, which is very similar to what he was just talking about, but I want to really give clarity to it, is the most important thing to understand when doing requirements, in my opinion, is the one why. Like, why are we doing this? What is the reason for doing this? That is not necessarily going to get you an answer about what fields need to be on a screen, but I don't believe that piece of it is easier to answer when you understand the why. And it doesn't always have to be one why, but really understanding the underlying business driver for doing this is really, really important.
Come on, Matt, you're spoiling my blog. Just kidding. No, that's
you talk about how.
That's totally true. The why is so important. If we're not accomplishing that, then it's not worth the time. And some people think they know what they want by prescribing themselves solutions that is not going to do the trick. So it's your job to, like, honestly, as our job as a consultant is to kind of pick out, ask questions in different ways that gets you to understand the problem, so that you can understand if what they're asking for is really going to do what they want, and helping them navigate that process. Mm-hmm. Cool. Well, I'm going to hand it back over to Benjamin to give us a little more music. I think we're coming to close to the end of our time here. If you have any last minute questions, drop them in chat and we'll come off mute. But yeah, great questions so far.
Yep.
Cool. Thanks, Tanya. We'll see you next month. Yeah, Emma dropped some links in there if you want to schedule or register, for our next office hours. And we'll be back on the first Wednesday of next month. In the meantime, feel free to drop any questions you have on that page, and we'll be sure to answer them next time. But thanks again, everyone, for joining us, and we'll see you next time.